We're live.
Thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education on February 2nd. We're now going to shift to S219. For those of you who might just be joining us, we are looking at ways to put parameters around public dollars that go to religious institutions, as well as make certain that we are that those institutions are not discriminatory in any way. We have heard from now Oliver Olson, the chair of the state board. We've also heard from Peter Teachout, constitutional lawyer at BLS, and our very extremely capable ledge counsel, Mr. Desmarais. And so after having taken in a lot of testimony and heard a lot of back and forth, Mr. Desmarais is going to share a new draft with us, if you will. So with that, Jim.
Okay, so good afternoon. For the record, Jim Desmarais, ledge counsel. I want to first go through a two-page document, which is testimony about the draft. It's on the website. I'm happy to pull up there if you'd like. Either way. No?
I think we can see it. I think we can see it okay on the website.
I'm going to pull up myself, so I'll be looking at that. I won't see your faces for a minute, but okay. So what this does is it's comparing the current draft, which is draft 3.2, against the last draft the committee saw, which is version 2.1. I know Chair Campion saw an intermediate draft that the committee did not see, so that might be confusing. Chair Campion to you, but I'm comparing to the last draft the committee saw, and it does. I think it's here 5 things here. First, it creates a new category of approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition, and so I mentioned that an approved independent school under current law is eligible to receive public tuition, but not all schools do or want to. So schools become approved in part, I understand, just for the status of being approved, because it has to meet certain state board requirements. So what we're doing here is we're creating a subset of these approved independent schools, and the subset are those that are also eligible, both approved and also eligible to receive public tuition. So to qualify for this, there are 4 requirements. The school has to be approved as an independent school by the state board. It has to comply with all federal and state anti-discrimination laws applicable to Vermont public schools. It has to not use public tuition to support religious instructional worship or the propagation of religious views. And it has to enroll any student with an IEP who requires special education services, who is placed by the student's IEP team or the local education agency, which is the supervisory union. This last one, D, is part of Act 173, which goes into effect on July 1, 2023. So what you see in the draft is that the first three requirements are being put into law, take effect on July 1 of this year, and then there's a section to add this a year from then when those rules come into effect. That's the first thing. So the first thing is we're creating this subcategory of approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. The second thing is that based on testimony you heard from Chair Olson, it centralizes administration of the approval process with the state board and the AOE. So the way the bill works is the SBE will receive school compliance certifications and will approve independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition. And then the AOE will maintain a list of approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition on its website. And school districts will only pay to an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition that are on AOE's list. So there's no requirement now for the schools to determine anything other than the schools on this list, and therefore it is eligible to receive public tuition.
Jim, could I trouble you, sorry to be a pain, just to move your
Yeah.
mic a little bit? We're just getting some kind of,
Sorry. Is that better?
oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Sorry.
I apologize.
Could
Is
you
that
hear
better?
me? Do you want me to go back
We're
over?
still, we're still getting it.
I'm not sure why. It's my usual mic. What? I'm not sure how to fix that.
I mean, I would don't stress too much about it. We're kind of at the, but I don't. Senator Persick, do you have an idea?
Yeah, I thought I hear that too. It's kind of metallic. It's clear. I mean, it's loud, but it has like a fuzzy metallic-y thing to it. About it today. I think it's just the way it's hooked up today. I don't know.
Yeah. Can you hear me well enough?
We can hear you well enough. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. I apologize for that.
No, it's just grating on our nerves. Don't worry about that. It's fine. It's great.
All right. So I went through the fact that we're centralizing administration with SBE and AOE. Also, the draft is designed to be consistent with the state board's draft update to its independent school approval rules. And then it also responds to issues raised in the Supreme Court or argument in the main case. It does that in a few ways. And this was, the first one was a point of emphasis, Professor Black's testimony to you. So it adds findings on the reason Vermont allows non-operating districts to pay tuition to independent schools. This is not like other state tuition programs because in Vermont, these independent schools serve a public purpose in educating students from districts that do not have public schools. And second, it strengthens the legal defense of the tuition system under the Establishment Clause by, and this is important, eliminating the ability of parents in non-operating districts to choose the school. This decision shifts to the non-operating district school board with input from parents. Let me pause there.
Yeah, that'd be a great spot. Thank you so much. So what we're saying here, if I'm understanding correctly, if the committee were to move in this direction, is every district in a non-operating district, those school boards would say, all right, you can choose from these 5 schools, and then the parents, no. Okay, please go ahead.
No, let me just go back and explain this. The reason this is here first, because I think it's important to understand the basis. So we've been talking about the free exercise clause for a long time. And the free exercise clause basically says that you can't make a law that infringes upon the free exercise of religion, okay? But the Establishment Clause is there too, and that says the state basically can't get too intertwined with religion. It can't create a church, it can't establish a religion. It can make no law regarding the establishment of religion. There's a case from 2002 called Zellman versus Simons Harris. In that case, it was an Ohio school district voucher program that allowed public taxpayer money to be used to support both secular and religious schools. Okay. 82% of those schools were religious, and 96% of the students using vouchers attended those religious schools. So although it could be used for both secular and sectarian schools, there's almost all used for religious schools. And the Supreme Court upheld the program against a challenge under the Establishment Clause. And very importantly, what it said is because the parents are making the choice of where to send their kids to school, because it's a parent choice, and because it's a parent choice, the link is broken between the state and payment to and the school. So in other words, when you break the link, having the parents choose not the state or the local school districts, when the parents get to choose, the state's no longer involved in that decision. and therefore it's okay to pay that money to these religious schools. So what this draft does is it takes away parent choice, because that means that I think there's a strong argument, and I believe Professor Teacher agrees, that if you take away parent choice, it may be impermissible for the state to pay money to these schools. So that's the reason why parental choice is important. And you don't have to have it in this draft, but it strengthens the argument to support what you're doing.
So just to clarify, you're saying parental choice in the Ohio case, though, was allowing for dollars to go to religious schools.
Correct.
Okay.
Under the establishment clause. So we're on a different clause now. But
under
yes.
under the establishment clause.
Yeah.
What you're saying is under the establishment clause, you want, if that choice is taken away from parents. So how does that, because we're going to have everybody watching this freaking out. What does that mean to take away parental choice?
So what that means from a legal standpoint is now it's the state making a decision to send a student to a religious school and to pay for it. And because parents are involved in making that choice, it's a state decision. There's a good argument, I believe, that the court would rule or may rule that you can't make that payment because it's enmeshing the state too much in religion. It's basically having the state be too involved in choosing the school and paying the school. That parental choice cuts off that state involvement. So when you reverse out of that, now you have an argument, oh, well, you can't pay that money because it violates the establishment clause because the state's controlling the choice and the payment. It's a big policy change, so I'm flagging it in the draft. I flag it, I highlight this in blue so people can really focus on it and see it. And the other thing I'll mention is, so the way it works in the draft is the school district decides with parental input and with taking into account child's needs, the school's capacity to serve the child. So, you know, it's a bit of a, but the decision's with the school board of the non-operating district, and it's final. It's not appealable to the state board or anything else.
So on the ground, sort of real look at this is if Montpelier were a non-operating district and it had 5 independent schools out there, you're talking about, and I'm just trying to get to the nuts and bolts of what it really looks like.
Yeah.
You're not saying, are the Perchlicks able to say we want to send our daughter to school to Academy A? You're saying that can't happen anymore, like they may have been able to.
The parents can advocate for that. They have input, but the school board makes the decision. Right? So because that takes away parental choice. Mm-hmm. I'm making this, I'm putting this in here because I believe it strengthens your position legally. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting it's a good idea or a bad idea from a policy standpoint. It's a big change from a policy standpoint. But I believe it strengthens your argument.
Senator Perchlik.
What if I understand shifting the decision to the school board. What if if the decision was 2 schools, like you can send it either of these 2 schools, but it was either 2 religious schools or 2 non-religious schools. Could they give parents a choice in those situations?
You could change this to give parents some limited choice, but I'm not sure it's going to stand up as well. This hasn't been tested. So this comes off of the statements that Justice Amy Coney Barrett was making, saying what would happen if you did this way? And it kind of really was interesting because she was questioning whether you have a whole different result if you did it this way.
But you think just with parental input is sufficient?
I think so, because they're making the decision, and the decision is final by the school board, so it can't even be appealed. So that's the approach I've taken.
Well, it's interesting. Let's just talk about this for a minute. So if a school board is elected, so here you have an elected group of folks, and I think what you would maybe find in this state is you'd have people, the school board would say, okay, we're going to stick with the print, whatever the parent would like. But you could see some school board members possibly saying, nope, you're not going to go to Academy A. We're going to send you right over to Academy B. For whatever reason that might be. We're not asking them to justify anything. We're not asking them to say because of, it could be because those two dads had a fight back in the 80s in high school, and it's like, hey, I want your kid to go to, there's no reason you don't have to substantiate the reason.
It's the same. It's the same though for operating districts. So on an exceptional basis, if you're a student attending a school in an operating district, but you want to go on public tuition to the other school, private school maybe, somewhere else because it has a different curriculum or sports or whatever, you can petition your school board to get public tuition, and they decide whether you can go or not. So it's the same process. I'm picking up on the same process that's on the operating side, which is exceptional process to put over on the operating side.
Right, which is incredibly interesting, and it's a brilliant way to look at it. You could see where though these schools that are dependent upon students also, could all of a sudden, you're not talking about a one-off. Hey, we're going to send our kid from Montpelier. We're going to say no. Vermont Academy is the place where he or she really needs to be because of a certain program, and we're going to approve that. This is more of a hey, such and such a school just is short 50 students because the school board decided to send the kids somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, what this draft does not do is it does not take away the ability of the school board to decide that the right school is in Massachusetts or in Switzerland. Because today you can send your kid, anywhere. So another consideration for you is whether if you go this approach, whether you want to limit the ability to use public tuition only for Vermont approved independent schools. And the other thing is for those schools in Vermont, the approved independent schools which are eligible to take public tuition, that category, that doesn't really work for out-of-state schools or for schools out of the country because they're required to comply with Vermont laws on anti-discrimination. And so you can't really graft the same protection so much when it comes to out-of-state schools. So I haven't done that because, it's up to your call. So that's questions for
Mr. Desmarais at this point on that concept.
We do have, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, please.
We do have some kids that take Vermont public dollars and go out of state right now. It's a small handful, right? So that would get some emails, but I support it. It's public dollars. Let's keep it within Vermont where we have controls and regulatory constraints on those schools.
Yeah, my only issue really with not doing it is sometimes I think, and I could be wrong, I've never really jumped into this, are schools that might provide students with a special services. If you are deaf and hard of hearing and there isn't a school in Vermont, are those students going to, a school? Those are the students that I'm really concerned about. If you're going to, some prep school, or somewhere abroad, I'm just not that worried about it. Senator Perchlik.
The other thing we've heard in the past, and I thought there was a town in your area, Bennington, where there isn't a public school. The closest public school is over the border in Massachusetts or New York. Like to go to high school in Vermont, they'd have to drive 2 hours or something, but there's one down the road, 5 minutes.
That's right. That is. Yeah, there's a school in Massachusetts, and it is, I don't remember the name of it, but it's over by Reedsboro. And yes, you're right. It's a school that students do go to. It is the closest school. by far.
That would be the other exception that I would.
Yeah.
support.
Yeah.
Do you have a hard stop at 5?
We've been at this for a while.
Yeah.
I don't want everybody to,
Is it worth just me taking you through a very high level draft, just so
Yes.
you can see how it's structured? Would that be
Yeah.
helpful? Okay.
that would be helpful, and then we can stop and let people think about it. I'll be honest. I think, and I am really just one vote on this committee. I'm not sure what if we could get this this version pat. I get it. I completely understand where you're coming from, but I think the 4 academies in particular, given the geographic locations they are throughout the state, that's covering a lot of the Senate and House, and I don't see them endorsing that. To be honest, I'm concerned about school board members making these decisions for hundreds, thousands, 5,000 students, having them come before school boards and saying, we want to go to this school. And then the school says no, and we're going to redirect you. That does concern me. And I do see the possibility of lawsuits, of upsetting, sort of upsetting that educational landscape that we have. I don't know how other people are feeling about it. It's one of my concerns. I just want to go in eyes wide open. So if you want to give us an overview, that would be great.
A quick overview. I won't read stuff to you. I'm just going to tell you that on page 1, we have on line 9, we have a new section we're adding to law called Provision of Publicly Funded Education in Vermont. There's a whole findings and purpose section. And the first findings are about Vermont's history of using independent schools as a proxy for public schools in non-operating districts. So that's on page 1 and 2. It talks about the fact that in order to receive public funding, you have to comply with these requirements of anti-discrimination, etc. And then on page 3, we get back into what we've been talking about already, which is the whole Chittenden town, the whole use versus status stuff we've been talking about. That's here too. So basically, I've added on to the earlier findings language about how Vermont is kind of unique and how it uses these independent schools. Then on page 3, on line 12, is subsection B, which are the conditions you have to meet to be eligible to receive public tuition. And one is about anti-discrimination. On page 4, 2 is about not using it for religious instruction. 3 is about the fact that the State Board of Education has to approve these schools to receive public tuition. And then C on line 17 is the process for payment and school selection. It's about the agency doing the website, the list of approved on the website, and school districts using that list and paying directly to schools. And then page 5, line 3 is this whole thing about, in bold here and highlight, is about taking away parental choice. So that's on page 5, lines 3 through 11. Then section 1A is a little confusing. It's amending the very section we just added because section 1A takes place a year from now, in July 1 of 2023, to pick up that category of the IEP students, to make that also a condition to receiving public funding. So it's adding that third factor there, but not for a year. Then you go all the way up to page 9, which we've seen before, which is the unlawful employment practice, taking away that provision. And dual enrollment is on page 9 and 10. And then from 10 to 20 is all conforming changes, because now that we have this subcategory of approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition, we need to use that term throughout Title 16 when we're referring to these schools. So the rest of the document from page 10 to page 20 are conforming changes. And the effective date is on page 19, is on pastures, except for 3 sections, 1A, 6, and 14. These are all dealing with the independent schools taking students on IEP, and that doesn't come into effect until July 1 of next year. So that's why they have a delayed effective date. So that's an overview of the bill. I'm happy to take questions, but that's all I have to say at this stage, unless you want more detail.
It's great work. I mean, it's yeah, no, it's impressive. Questions or comments for Mr. Desmarais at this point? I mean, we're kind of at a decision point, you know, whether, you know, I'm looking back right now at 2.1, and I have some questions for you, which you and I can discuss at some point. But, you know, I for one am interested in, you know, the anti-discrimination stuff and trying to put some parameters around how these dollars are spent. I just, I'm not saying that the chair of appropriations would never let me get anything out of appropriations this year, but I know that St. Johnsbury Academy and Linden Institute, and then what's the other one over next to Stratford? I mean, we have Bedford. I mean, these academies are all over the state. I just don't personally see this working, giving it to school board members. And then you have school board members running for office based on, I don't know where kids are going to, it could get complex, but it's an incredibly interesting and important idea. So
I'll just say, if I could, that provision, as I say, I think it helps your legal position, but it's easy to take out and it doesn't affect the rest of the document at all. Yeah.
Okay. Senator Perchlik.
I just wondered, I understand what Jim was saying about trying to maximize its impact, but I agree with you, Senator Campion. It would be a very big change and lift. And if you thought the waiting emails were tough, those would be more, I think. But I wonder if the school boards, and maybe this is basically what they're already doing, but they're saying they're picking the schools, but they're picking a list of schools. Like, here are the 4 schools you can go to, which something like that, if that helps even a little bit, because I think most of the towns, 90% of them go to just a few schools. Like, there are those one random kids that go off to Switzerland, or Canada or something, but I think the vast majority are going to a group of schools that the state could choose.
And that might be protective too. As I said, we don't have any case law on this, so I went with the most protective, but you could water it down a bit and see what happens. So
interesting, yeah. Senator Lyons.
Well, it does raise the question of how much tuition may be and how much the state would be willing to put into that. But then the question about the blue language is the consequences of keeping it out. One, in the state of Vermont, it's business as usual, more or less. So there isn't the concern being raised locally, but it does open up for external challenge. So someone who's interested in the whole area of school, religious school money coming from secular sources, from state sources. But are we seeing a rash of those? We've already talked about a number, but it's just hard to predict. But I guess I agree with Senator Campion that if our state is happy, it is a political decision. There's no question.
Jim, could we put a penalty in here if a religious school were to use dollars for proselytizing, those kinds of things? We want people to say, hey, we're really not going to do this.
Right, you could do that. I don't know though how you enforce it. I mean, in terms of, like, it's kind of, again, based on good faith certification.
Well, I get it. I mean, look what we did. I was a big believer
Yeah.
in raising the age to 21 and smoking. You know, Center Lions Committee did that, I think, last year or the year before, a couple years ago. That's a hard one to, you know, it's tough. I mean, the kids holding the cigarettes, you know, all those things. But there is that sort of, I do think some kids are saying, you know, I'm not going to take the chance, and, you know, I'm not going to go to the count. You know, I think there's some preventative measures there that could be put in.
Possibly. Now, one of the issues I think around that is any school, any organization can have a case of discrimination. I mean, staff don't always get it right? Even if you're trying to get it right. So, I mean, what the bill requires now is that they have on their website a statement that they won't discriminate against anybody, and certification to that effect by the headmaster under the authority of the governing board of the school. So there's some stuff in here that helps, I think.
No, I understand that, but what about, I'm saying, you know, we're getting schools to say we're not going to use we might do a history of world religions, but what we're not going to do is use these dollars to pay Reverend so-and-so. And I'm saying if those dollars somehow are seen as paying Reverend so-and-so, then there's a penalty for that.
Yeah.
Again, hard to prove, I get it. But if you're reading this, you might say, hey, we're going to be particularly careful. The state's serious. You know, we don't want a 5,000 or whatever it is. So anyway, just something to think about.
Okay. Yeah.
Committee, anything else? I really appreciate everybody staying over. Great. Okay, I think we'll leave it there, Jim.
Okay, good.
Thanks, everybody.